You bring up Haystacks Calhoun. Of course, there was Haystacks Muldoon also. And it's kind of crazy. You think of the Pfeffer people, you don't always think of them as working like the big shows. But no, this guy was like everywhere the Haystacks Calhoun was for a while. Where do you stand on the debate Haystack versus Haystacks?
I always liked Haystacks because it sounded better. And I think that's what it kind of morphed into, because first it was Country Boy Calhoun, and then it was Haystack Calhoun, and then a lot of people started doing Haystacks because what the boys called him, behind his back they called him a variety of things, but what he was called in the locker room was Stacks. So a lot of times the promoters and the boys, they ran with that, and it became the terminology, and that's where that came from. He got pluralized.
But technically, I guess it should be just a single haystack.
It should be a single haystack because he was only a single giant round mound of shit.
Was Haystacks like a common thing for lack of a better term, fat country boys? Or was it, it wasn't invented as a name for someone, for him, was it?
No, it wasn't unheard of. It wasn't, like everybody was called Haystack, but it wasn't unheard of. But that was because Country Boy Calhoun was just kind of generic. And so then they came up with Haystack Calhoun. But, and again, his business kind of got exposed when the McGuire twins came along. And
they made Haystack Calhoun look like Ric Flair.
Well, yeah, and you talked about Haystack Muldoon, but also remember Man Mountain Mike? It was when Haystack Calhoun was getting a little up there in years, and I guess he quit probably around 78, 79. I saw him live in 77 for the only time. But Man Mountain Mike came along, and he was a little bit younger, but he was like the West Coast version of Haystacks, because Haystacks would work a lot for the Sheik. And on the eastern part of the country, and Man Mountain Mike would be the West Coast Haystacks Calhoun. But when the McGuire twins came along, it kind of killed the gimmick, because Calhoun legitimately probably wasn't 500 pounds. He was always billed as 601. He was probably like 470, 480. And back in those days, you didn't see anybody even that big. But when the McGuires came along, and they were billed, and in the Guinness Book of World Records were 640 and 660, they were twice as fucking fat as Calhoun. And so you're like, even when I was a kid, when I was 13, I'm going, well, wait a minute, there's no way that those two are only fucking 50 pounds heavier than that guy. So it kind of, and Calhoun could do like 3 or 4 things, which was about 2 or 3 more than the McGuires could do. And he could get in the ring without having to take the bottom rope off. So he had that going for him. That's the only way they get the McGuires in the ring, they had to take the bottom rope off.
I didn't know that, no.
I saw them live 4 times, and that's the only way they would unscrew one of the bottom turnbuckles, and then they'd roll in under the rope, and then they'd put the turnbuckle back on.
That's crazy. I mean, we've seen some fat people get in the ring. What was their problem? Was it?
No. There's nobody walking around that you see in public that was as unnaturally obese as the McGuire twins. And I mean, they got up 6'4", even Yoko. Yeah, think about this. Remember when Yoko was 800 pounds? He didn't look like the McGuire twins, because they were even shorter than Yoko, but plus it was all flab. Their bellies hung past their knees. It was just everywhere. Their arms were so T-Rex in relation to their body that they couldn't hardly reach out and do anything. It was very disturbing when you really think about it. And yeah, no, I mean, maybe on some other rings, maybe that used ropes instead of cables or whatever, but I never saw them be able to get in the ring where they didn't have to roll under the goddamn second rope after they took the bottom rope off. Because they started at 640 and 660, but they got up in the Guinness World Record book to, I believe, like 740 and 760 before the one had the surgery. One died young and one had the surgery. And
that photo of them on the motorcycles, is that one of the most famous photos of a professional wrestler ever?
Oh, yeah. And they sold them at the matches too, a variety of different poses of them on the mini bikes. But that was kind of the early version of, and I mean, this is morbid to say this, but the motorized wheelchairs and the scooters they've got now for the fat people at Walmart. It was a gimmick they did, that they rode the motorbikes or the mini bikes for publicity, but also they couldn't walk very far. So in a lot of cases, they had to ride them to get around anyway. And then when they were traveling the territories, they had a car that was customized where I believe they took the front bench seat out and extended the pedals and the steering wheel somewhat where they could sit in the back seat and still operate it. But a lot of times they'd have to get rides with guys in vans or whatever. And when they went to Japan, where they were just, the people went crazy over them, seeing these, oh my God, look at these giant Americans.
Orca.
Yeah. But, it was traveling was hard on them. And then they married twin sisters that weighed 100 pounds apiece.
See, that's a gimmick. Come on. I mean, how could that happen?
Well, I mean, it's not like they were making millions of dollars. I don't know how they would have talked these girls into going along with that gimmick, but it actually happened. They were from North Carolina. They're very nice boys, very good old country boys, but boy, howdy.
When we circle back to Country Boy Calhoun to end this, where does Haystack Calhoun or Haystacks Calhoun rank for you on the list of all-time wrestling names?
It's one of the classics. You've got Gorilla Monsoon, Bobo Brazil, Haystack Calhoun. Those names resonated with people when they saw them in newspaper ads or when they heard them on television or saw them on a poster. You can remember names like that, and they were around so long, they built up such a fan base that, those were classic names. That's why I always say the name test is more than just a gimmick. If you don't have the right name in any kind of show business, much less wrestling, then that can affect, your career. And if you've got a name that resonates with people, they remember, they get a kick out of, whatever, that could help you. And Killer Kowalski. They're fucking talking about Killer Kowalski on a Seinfeld episode from 1997. Because of the name.
And his move. And the stomach claw.
Yeah, and the stomach claw. But you would remember, oh gosh, I remember Lorenzo Parenti had that wonderful move. It's not the same thing.